from the CyberHub bunker and studio. You're listening to the CISOTalk podcast. No sales, no bullshit, just straight talk. Straight talk. And now for your host and CISO, James Azar.
Hey folks, welcome to another episode of the CISOTalk podcast. We have a great show for you guys today. I'm very, very excited about my guest. I got to tell you, first time I spoke to Jason, I felt like we were, brothers lost from another mother. But before we get started on today's show, make sure you do subscribe to our podcast right now. If you're watching us on YouTube, subscribe, turn on the notification bell right here below. Should be right over here or here, one of those places. Turn on the notification bell and subscribe. That way you'll get notified every time we post a brand new episode. If you're listening on your favorite podcast listening platform, make sure to subscribe and give us 5 stars rating, please. 5 stars helps push our content higher and higher. I want to thank all the people listening from Africa, Europe, and the Middle East. We are in the top 20 in the technology podcast sector thanks to your loyal listening. So please, I'm grateful for that. So make sure to subscribe and share. You can find all of our content on our website at cyberhubpodcast.com. So you can go there and check out all of our other podcasts, including some of our exclusive live stuff. And joining me for today's CISOTalk episode, Jason Loomis. He's the CISO over at MindBody. How's it going, Jason?
Going great, James. How are you doing?
You know, I'm doing amazing. I'm grateful for another day in the greatest country on the planet. So I can't really complain. Like I try to find, you can't find reasons to complain when you live in our country.
I second that.
It is, it's great. So Jason, kind of as we get started on today's episode, if you don't mind, would you give our audience a little background into how you kind of got started in cyber and what was your career path, kind of in your journey?
Yeah, sure. Like most good stories, it's kind of like in the vein of the interconnectedness of all things. I'm sure a lot of us in security weren't going through high school and college thinking, hey, I would love to get into security. I don't even know if it existed back then. But, it was a confluence of things going for, I'll throw out just some keywords and not bore you with the long story. It was a combination of a wedding in Nevada, a green card, Duke Nukem, and MCSE NT40. You combine all those things together and all these disparate events that got me into technology. And then that was about, obviously I'm dating myself, that was about 20 years ago. Then about 10 years ago, I pivoted into security through another confluence of events, which, isn't kind of the same words, University of Oregon, beer, and probably my favorite quote that got me into this was, dude, I wrote that, from my mentor, Paul Love, who we met in our MBA program, and he ended up, we were chatting, and he's like, what are you into these days? Oh, I'm reading this book. You probably never heard of it called Visible Ops. And he looks at me like I'm crazy. And he's like, dude, I wrote that. And then that just sparked a friendship. It's been around for 10 years, and really, that and some other events, I pivoted over into security about 10 years ago and been loving every day of it since.
For those who don't know Paul was on the show. In fact, I think 6 episodes or 3 episodes back from this one, I had him on Veteran November.
That's right. I listened to that podcast. It was great.
And so you guys can actually go back and listen to Paul. Paul was very insightful on that one episode. Really kind of, I want to say, very interesting guy. And that's saying it mildly.
Yeah, I would call him a jerk because he's a little bit of an overachiever. So standing next to him, I would get picked last for kickball because he's always the rock star. Guy's written 10 books, wrote a book with Gene Kim. But that's why he's my mentor and I'm his mentee because I look up to him a lot.
Yeah, Paul's absolutely brilliant. Let's, for today's episode, before we get in and talk a little bit about leadership, I do want to talk to you a little bit more about, documentation and cyber. And, one of the things that we often talk about is writing policies, writing up documentation. Right now I have a survey on LinkedIn that I'm asking, other CISOs, which is, how do you buy? Do you talk to your peers? Do you read reviews and so forth? And one of the common stuff below of some of the comments of some of the participants in the survey so far of my unscientific scientific survey on LinkedIn that I will use as a way to, reach some level of conclusion based on my question is documentation. And let's talk a little bit about documentation. So what's your secret to proper documentation?
I can start with the importance of documentation in any size organization. And nobody ever wants to hear that. Nobody ever wants to start with writing. They want an action. They go, let's go start securing things. Even if it's a 1-person team at a 100-person company and you're the first guy that's going to take security under your wing, everyone starts with this idea that I need to go do something. I don't want to write a policy that no one's going to read. I don't want to write these standards that no one's going to read. But it starts with that. You have to start by, and this is a security term, an administrative control. You start with something that you say you're going to do. And then you can start going down the path of, okay, let's implement some technical controls around that, whether it's detective or preventative. But it all starts with documentation. And my secret is that you should treat documentation as a creative exercise, not I'm an accountant and I'm writing down a bunch of steps or a bunch of things that we do. Because it really, truly is, and this will segue nicely into the leadership conversation. I feel like it does, because getting a team to be creative as a leader is challenging, and there's good ways to do it. Or in my opinion, I have these good ideas of how to do it. But when I write my documentation, the best analogy in the world, and also I stole this from Paul Love, but I swear I have taken it and made it 2.0 because I have a full process. I have a full process of how you can do this, and it's not as hard as it's going to sound. But if you think of documentation like a pizza, like documentation around, let's say my company, MindBody, makes pizzas. If you think about it, that's what the business does. A policy statement would be very simple in one sentence. It would say, MindBody will make pizzas. Done. That is my policy. In fact, at MindBody, my cybersecurity policy is 2 pages and 14 statements. And I hand that to auditors every year. And I hand that to our customers. Hey, what's your security policies? Here, we do these 14 things. Very simple, high level, a single statement about what your intent in security is. That's a good policy, and that's that first step of the pizza. It's like, hey, we make pizza. Your next level down, standards, is where you really get into a little more of the mechanics of it. And it's okay, you know what, our pizzas are going to be round because, who wants a square pizza? Our pizzas are going to be round. They're going to be served.
Only weird people from Chicago want square pizzas.
That's right. I am a Chicago. I guess I go both sides. I'm Chicago and New York, but if I had to choose, I'm going to go Chicago style.
I'm going New York every time, each and every time. New LinkedIn survey. What's a better pizza, Chicago style or New York style? I'm going to bet it's going to be a 50-50 across the board. Well, we're going to find out, because after this episode airs, there will be a survey on my LinkedIn page at James J. Azar where people can vote on whether they want Chicago or New York style pizza.
Well, great. And you just brought up a great point about standards. Standards, you don't want to also tell people how to do something. Let's say you like Chicago and you want to be able to have a standard that supports both Chicago style and New York style pizzas. Because at the end of the day, it's pizza. Yeah, we have some security guidelines like health and safety. Well, your pizza needs to be 140 degrees. It needs to be served in a cardboard box so people don't burn themselves. That's an example of a good standard. That standard supports, hey, do you want thick crust like Chicago style deep dish? Or do you want a really thin crust round New York style? If I write my standard right, I can still get my compliance down with making sure it's the right temperature. I can get it so that it's not harming other people when they're grabbing it by specifying, hey, it needs to be in a cardboard box. But I'm leaving a lot of flexibility for individual pizza makers to write their own, you recognize this word out there, guideline. Hey, here's how, or process. Here's how I make my pizza. Oh, I take my gloves on, I roll the dough, I put the sauce, I put the pizza on, I stick it in the oven for this many things. But security, if you really focus on just those two, the first two, a very high level policy, and then a very simple standard that just sets the security controls in place, you're going to save yourself a lot of time with these crazy documents and policies that you see that include process. And those are should be the bane of any security person's existence. They're the bane of mine. Because process can change daily, process can change with technology. But if you write your policies and standards a very specific way of keeping them very simple and high level, the change frequency on those is a lot less. So like I just wrote a standard that supported Chicago style and New York style. I don't care. With security, I care about these specific things. And you'll get a lot of, another tip I have too is, which a lot of security people don't do enough, is you need to be able to defend, it needs to be defensible against your auditors. People a lot of times are either afraid to defend against an auditor and argue, or even external counsel. So if you've ever worked with external counsel and had, as soon as my counsel brings external counsel in, for some reason they think they're Moses on the Mount, follow whatever, do whatever he says, because that's external counsel. They're right. You don't need to listen to them.
Well, you brought up a good point, which is you need to be able to defend the policy, guideline, and processes you've put in place against counsel. If you can't do it, then they're not the Moses that knows it all, because you could be right and they can be wrong, but you're unable to stand up for what you've put down on a piece of paper, right? Kind of like anything you write down, if you want to argue your point, you have to be able to stand behind the policy you put in place. Otherwise, every time someone from outside is going to come and say, you should do this, and if you automatically do that, even though it doesn't, work within, your grand scheme of things, it can create issues and within your policy and documentation.
Yeah, and true. And external auditors and external counsel and auditors are doing just what we're doing. It's their opinion. It's all based on that's what lawyers do. They read the law and then, hey, here's how I interpret that law. Auditors do the same thing. Here's the PCI control. Here's the high trust control. This is my interpretation as auditor of what you need to do for this. You can absolutely defend and argue that. So, for example, at MindBody, I took a 44,000 word policy that combined policy, standards, and process. I still hate that people put process in policies, and reduced it down to 17,000 words. And each standard is less than 3 pages. So if someone wants to know, hey, what do we do for vulnerability management? I have maybe 19 statements that are all measurable, definable, very simple, basic statements that are my standards. And then each one of those becomes a control statement that you can measure. I know this sounds like I'm hearing myself going, wow, isn't that a lot of work? Not really. It took us a team of 6 of us. Yes, it was 3 full days, but we did a 3-day offsite locked in a hotel conference room where you just write. I have this whole tactical approach to it. That's you put stuff up on walls and you break it down in index cards. You just write and you peer review each other's writing, which will come up again when I talk about leadership, the importance of peer review and some leadership tactics when you're making decisions. I have this whole process, and you come out 3 days later and you've got 95% complete new policies and standards that are defensible and have passed every audit I've been through.
Yeah, I spoke to Mark Hopt a while ago. He's the CISO over at DataBank. And we talked about auditors because unfortunately he has to deal with external counsel and external auditors, I think more than any one of us would ever like to deal with, right? Being that he's the CISO over at DataBank, and when people want to do business with data centers, they tend to want to bring the cavalry in to make sure that, everything is set in place, especially around kind of, security and whatnot. And he brought up a bunch of good points about working with auditors, and one of them was just what you talked about, is they're coming in with their interpretation, with their idea of what the law is. You just have to know that your policy supports the overall court or regulating body's interpretation of it, not that person's. Right? If you're able to back up your policy with saying, yeah, that might be your definition of it, but that's not how the regulator or the court sees it, then that kind of changes the discussion at that point.
Yes, absolutely. So there is some, you do need to know which any good CISO should, or anybody at my level running this exercise, you do need to know your compliance requirements. So another part of this 3-day exercise is we went through and tore apart the PCI ROC, which is the report on compliance, which details everything an auditor looks for. If you don't know what that is, go look for it. It's 350 pages, but it will tell you every single piece of evidence and piece of documentation an auditor looks for in a PCI audit. High Trust has the same equivalent. And we went through and pulled that out and said, what is for every control, what are they looking for in documentation? And we matched that up to our final product. So literally you can go look at the PCI and say, oh, it's control 12.3. We map it through this master control list, which is an Excel spreadsheet that points to every standard statement and says, oh, this one, 12.3, maps to, oh, we have that in identity and access management, and it's our third statement. IAM-3. So that process of creating standards, the standards, and getting rid of this process BS that you need to do, and just say, where does it say that we're going to do this in PCI or high trust? That also gives you that master mapping. So anytime an auditor comes in and says, well, you don't have this, I can say, no, I do. It's right here on this page, on this standard.
So you bring up a very, very good point. I kind of want to talk a little bit about that from an idea of different organizations have different standards. They use different policies. It's a huge challenge for us as security practitioners. I think it's part of the reason why there's still a large disconnect between security and the board. Is a predominant amount of board members don't serve on one singular board, but rather serve on multiple boards. And while they hear the same message from every CMO, CFO, COO, CTO, CIO, they hear different messages from every single CISO. And so they're unable to really, as a board member, properly evaluate security in every company or understand the risk being taken on because we haven't standardized it. So how do we get over that challenge, in your opinion?
Wow. You don't ask easy questions.
No, I don't. I'm sorry. But Paul was able to handle my hard questions pretty easily. I'm just saying.
Oh, is this where I can phone a friend? I'm very reluctant to use the word framework here, to say there needs to be a documentation framework, but there are some frameworks that are successful, in my opinion, that are easy for even small companies. I'll give a good example. My favorite security framework is the CIS-20. So if you follow I know I'm using the word simplistic, but please don't take CIS-20 as simplistic, but it's more a real-world pragmatic approach to cybersecurity controls of what you can do as an organization, and then they make it so that a normal, everyday Clark Kent system administrator can understand what I need to do to get there. Versus you go and try to throw NIST at somebody or ISO, their head will explode if they're not familiar with security and frameworks, and they're so complex and so vast. If you made a very simple approach, and CIS is also a tiered approach, where kind of, in a way, you could say it takes the pizza approach. It says, hey, start with these first 6. If you do these 6, you'll reduce risk by 86%. And even those 6 are then, hey, here's a high level of it. It says hardware inventory, but underneath it, there's some more details like standards underneath that, and takes kind of a tiered approach to it. So if you did something like that within a documentation framework for policies and standards, I think that could work. And if you give me a hotel room with about 5 guys, give me about 2 weeks, I guarantee I could build one.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big supporter of CIS-20. In fact, I think most CISOs in the 2 years I've been doing the podcast that I've been on, we often talk more about CIS-20 than we do, let's say, for example, NIST or ISO. Because it is, one, more practical, and number 2, it's easier to build action items, and number 3, it's essentially your foundation. And like any good program, you want to have a good foundation, and if you don't have a good foundation, then you probably don't have stable security.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, if just every small to large, any organization, gets those first 6 in place, which, it's a struggle for my organization. We've been struggling with number 1 and 2, which is hardware and software inventory control, which everyone, I'm sure anybody listening to this right now is shaking their head. Yep, it's a struggle for most organizations. But if you get these first, to start on these 6, you're 85%. And it's been study after study has proven the Australian 8, which follows the same model, showed that reduction of 85% in cybersecurity risk. It's just a great, easy way to understand security and to explain it to executives compared to explaining NIST.
True. We talk about frameworks from a industry standard perspective and a reporting perspective, but what about from a documentation perspective? You and I both have to go through vendor assessments or do vendor assessments on vendors within our organization, and I don't think that I've never ever seen 2 similar documents when it comes to policy and documentation.
No, I have not. Could there be something or some standardization? Again, I'm hesitant to say yes. Why I'm hesitant to say yes? Because, and why am I such a fan of CIS-20 versus a policy or standard? I think because maybe, and I could be wrong with this, is that I believe there's some art involved in good policies and standards, like writing a good book. There's no framework for here's your book. Great, let me just throw in my story. Yeah, great point. There's an outline, there's a format, a way that you tell a story. But the story itself, there's some creative aspects to it. And the way that I do my policies and standards, we get everybody in that room and we write them, is very specific and key to the company, the vertical that we're in, our compliance requirements, everything. So the words on page, I don't think are going to align, but you could have like an outline or a flow or a way to organize your policies and standards.
Yeah,
I should be taking notes during all this. Oh wait, I can play this back later.
You can always play this back later. But I will say this: we do need some standard in security that is universal across the board, whether it be documentation, because what it does is it kind of aligns all of us CISOs and puts us in uniform, right? Which helps us contend better with, councils, with auditors, with executive leadership, and even within our own staff. Having some level of standardization gives us some continuity within us all working together, because at the end of the day, I love it when people say, yeah, we've got to do a security audit or we want to integrate these guys in. Let's send them the security checklist. And I'm like, fine, let's do that. But it'd be much easier if we just got on the phone with them for an hour.
Yes.
Right? It would save everyone a ton of Excel spreadsheets. It would save everyone a ton of time, and just, let me get on the phone with them and let us just have a conversation for 60 minutes. And then from there, we can ask for some supporting documents to support our conversation.
Yes.
It would speed it all up. But that's really not the case. And so it's almost like if we did have a standard, it might make life easier for us in that aspect. At least in documentation, where if every document kind of had a specific base to it and had some standard. I'm not saying it's got to be a copy paste policy, but everything kind of still has its own format. It has its own way of being looked at and processed. It does create some level of, it makes people's lives who have to look at security much easier.
Yeah, and so I do want to. I'm gonna challenge that notion a little bit. I think we're speaking the same thing, but I just have a different twist on it, or a little bit of a twist. So when I think of a good standard or a framework, is let's talk SIG. Nobody who's outside of security is going to understand what a SIG is,
right?
Or the 450 questions and responses in that. If you create this framework for what's all the things you got to do in security, and you put in your policies and standards, it's going to become unreadable or unusable by the common layman or the common. So it's that, how do you bridge security experts like us, that it has everything that we want and a standard we can understand across industries and across companies, to something that employee John is going to be able to easily read and understand and say, oh, that's what I need to do, or this is what I need to do for that. Because when I hand them my security stuff, they're not going to read that. I wrote my standards and policies specifically so that the lowest common denominator of employee with a basic education in computers can understand it.
No, and that's a really, really good point, which is when you talk about terminology. But I think we don't have to look too hard to find that precedent, because IT's already done it. Right? So think of IT policies 20 years ago or 15 years ago were so complex and difficult, and kind of isolated the non-techie, non-computer people from being able to do anything IT. And then over time, IT adapted, the user adapted, and a common language was born. And the same has to be done through security, and that's only done through the maturity of security, right? That's not going to happen overnight. There's, if we take the top 25 CISOs in our industry and we lock you all in a hotel room for 2 weeks and say, come out with a standard, I think we're going to come out with a bunch of bearded, tired, exhausted, beaten security folks who are going to be like, this is all we could agree on. And it might be, like you said, 2 pages, 14 statements. And then again, we go down that same route because we tend to kind of go down the rabbit holes as security people, right? I work in the financial industry, so I've got PCI and all these, and FINRA and FSISAC and all those different things. Whereas someone who's in healthcare, I've got HIPAA and high trust, and someone else somewhere else has their whole different set of standards. And if you're in the military and in the defense, now you've got CMMC. And so you've got all these different kind of things, and people go, well, it's based on industry. We got to look at security based on industry. And I kind of disagree with that notion. I think that's why we lose the battle in the boardroom. I think part of the reason why security loses the battle in the boardroom is because we as an industry can't just say, no, it has nothing to do with industry. Yes, different industries have different regulations, but the same could be applied to any other part of the business, right? A CFO for a bank has a lot more financial responsibility than, let's say, a CFO for a technology company. And a CFO at a publicly traded company has a whole new sets of responsibilities than a CFO at a private company with non-public stakeholders. So there are parities that exist within different roles, but they've found the almost standard way to work this, and we have to do the same in security. And I think that's going to be where we're really going to get our real work done and break down some of those barriers. What do you think?
Yeah, I like it. What do you think is going to do it first? SANS?
Negative.
Maybe.
I don't think it's, what I think it's going to be? It's going to end up being a cluster of practitioners like us who all say, okay, we're done with this. We're all going to come together. We're going to put out a standard. We're going to push it onto the vendors, the people who we spend money with, so that they push it out across their organizations. That way it gets pushed out as an industry. Because what is high trust? High trust isn't a regulator. High trust isn't a regulator standard.
Oh, it's a money-making machine? Did I say that out loud?
You did, but that's exactly what it's a money-making machine that was developed within the industry to create a standard that was beyond HIPAA. Right? And eventually, what's going to have to happen in security is we have to come together as practitioners and take, the Paul Loves, the Gary Hayslips, the, Jasons, the Tim Callahans, and the Mark Hops and those guys, and go, all right, guys, we've got to come up with some standards. And we want to create some level of standard that unifies it, one, in terms of reporting to the board, number two, in terms of documentation.
Right.
A flow that we know that if 30 of us worked on it and then it became a consortium of 200 different contributors and we pushed it out and we got big vendors to support it and push it out, and we all said, this is how we're going to work going forward, we can get more adoption quicker, and we can create something that becomes a standard.
There's a huge appetite in the market for that. How many people, when they're trying to write their policies, don't have even a starting point, and they go to Information Security Policies Made Easy version 18 and download this nightmare of a template that is all that there is. So I know that there's a huge market for that.
Yeah, a lot of times, I'll call people like you. Hey, Jason, I'm trying to work on this little piece of document. Do you have anything I could look at as a reference as I write my own? Because I don't even know where to get started.
Yeah.
Right. And that's how some people get their policies, is they end up calling their peers and, hey, let me send you something I wrote 2 versions ago. That'll be a good starting point for you. 3 versions ago. What's the maturity level of your organization? Because like you said, policy is a piece of art and it matures, and different people appreciate art with time differently.
True.
Right. So kind of taking it that way. Let's talk about leadership for a little bit. I typically always start with leadership, but with you, I kind of wanted to kind of go down this path and then really go into leadership, which is
documentation is not the sexy thing people want to talk about. So I'm glad we did.
Well,
I'm passionate about it,
but it's critical for people to talk about it, right? You can't have a security program without documentation.
You'd be surprised. People will say that they do. And I think that's practice more. Yeah, absolutely. I would agree you can't, but there are plenty of companies that would say, oh yeah, here's our security program. It's tribal knowledge, or it's a set of policies that haven't been dusted off in 5 years.
Well,
and they were written by an auditor.
So I counter that with saying, how would you feel if DevOps did no unit testing on anything they put out?
You'd be surprised. There's some company. Well, you probably aren't surprised, but there are companies that think they have DevOps and they don't do unit testing.
Yeah. So,
but agreed. There's the right way to do it, and then the right way to do it is you start with your policies, in my opinion.
Right, but exactly, I agree with you.
Yeah.
Totally support that. So let's talk a little bit about leadership. So, leadership plays a really significant role, actually within, policy setting and documentation. So talk a little bit about what you do from a leadership perspective to really lead the conversation and really build a executable, defensible policy.
So from a leadership perspective, and I'm going to talk from, I really focus on the team. In fact, I'll give you my entire sort of leadership mantra, which is that how your teams make decisions is more important than the decisions themselves. And I focus wholly on that. I mean, you'll see a bunch of stuff shooting off from this, but it all comes down to, in multiple frameworks, books, ideas that I'm sure everyone on this class, as I sort of spew them out during our conversation, have heard of 5 dysfunctions of a team. One of the best frameworks to pull from, that idea of trust being at the bottom, that your team has to trust each other. Things like Drive by Daniel Pink. I studied JFK and the Bay of Pigs, the Cuban Missile Crisis, and they all come across these same sort of themes that are really tied into the basic 5 dysfunctions, which means the first thing you got to start off with on any team is trust. And this is going to be like trust. What does that have to do with documentation? To build a creative process, you need to have trust and conflict. You talk to IDEO, that famous company in San Jose that created the Razor Mouse. They're a creative ideation company, and that's all they do is come up with ideas. And it's all about having a team together in a room that has the safety to be able to debate ideas. You're not debating people, you're debating the idea. Are we coming to the best decision? What should this statement say? As an example of, if I'm in that room writing it, what should this say? I got to be able to disagree with what you're writing to get to a better answer. And to be able to disagree like that, you got to have trust. And trust starts with the leader. Actually, the entire whole team thinks. I'm familiar with extreme leadership. Jocko Sims, I think.
Yeah, I am.
Yeah, great book. Great. The whole idea is that as the leader and as the CISO of your team, you are wholly 100% responsible for how your team performs. So I take that upon myself to build that trust. I start by showing that I'm vulnerable, that I can say, you know what, I F up all the time. I make a mistake a day, if not 3 mistakes a day. The idea that you remove fear from your team, that they're okay to make mistakes, that I'm going to say literally can't stand when I see leaders chew out teams for making a mistake. Sure, if you made 10 mistakes in a row, I get it. Maybe something needs to be done. When they're like, yeah, I can't believe that guy pushed that button, or that guy made that code change and pushed to production without testing. Mistakes are going to happen. If you get these people so afraid to do their job, they're not going to be able to, they're going to be working from a place of fear. So I absolutely make fear removal is an aspect of that trust. And then once you build trust in your team, which isn't like, you can't just have a trust fall, which is another thing that I hate, or these, the very fluffy leadership. Hey, let's just all catch each other and you have one good weekend. And then all of a sudden, okay, I've got my trusting team. It takes time and it takes practice. And you as the leader, by demonstrating and leading by example, start that process. And over months, you get your team to trust you and trust each other. And then that opens the door for things where you can have healthy conflict debates. And the creativity part, especially around writing documentation, believe it or not, is a creative exercise. How we got such good policies and standards was us in that room for 3 days, had some great conflict and debate. You've heard of a TV show called Sid Caesar's Show of Shows back in the 50s. It was like the pinnacle of comedy in 50s television. It had all the great writers on it. Mel Brooks, Carl Reiner, were all in this writer's room. And the writer's room was known for just having these drag-out brawl of conflict debates about the writing. But some of the most creative television came out of that. And it was all left in the room. It was the topic that they're arguing. They're not debating each other, but they would literally come in. And there was a great story where I think it was Carl Reiner that had the effigy of Mel Brooks. They were making fun of him. They had him hanging from the cylinder because they didn't like the script that he wrote for the last show. And then they'd go out and have beers afterwards. But that is something that I instill in my team today, every team that I have. And that we're got to be open, got to be able to conflict. And then there's an important role, too, that I think a lot of leaders leave out, called the devil's advocate, which is a great role that you absolutely must have in any decision-making process. When you're deciding, let's say you're deciding on a new SIM product. You're like, hey, we like Logarithm. I mean, it's the best. Splunk's too expensive, and the whole team is going down this path. If you don't have somebody that comes in to make sure that there's not cognitive biases at play, that the team isn't doing it just because I'm CISO and I like Logarithm, you assign someone to specifically poke holes in the direction the team is going and the decision they're going down. And that's part of that conflict. The devil's advocate was started, back in the first century, 1000, I think, when they had Pope Leo started the devil's advocate. And I don't know if you knew the numbers, but from when they had the church would want to canonize a saint, and they would get everybody in a room and decide. Most of the time, it was always on board with because everybody was like, "This person's great." They bring people from the region. They go, "Yeah, this guy, like he got water to this thing, and he should be definitely canonized." So Pope Leo said, "Well, it feels like there's this. We're all wanting to agree with them because everything's great. We want everybody to wish the best." But he assigned the role of devil's advocate, which was the literal translation was promoter of the faith, specifically to poke holes in that, to ensure that they're making the right decision. And over this, from 1000 to 1978, when Pope John Paul got rid of the devil's advocacy, I think about 450 popes were canonized. During John Paul's reigns, when they got rid of the devil's advocacy, 480. So you can see that control for almost 900 years was put in place, really reduced and made sure that they were making good decisions. And then as soon as you release that, you just go with this idea of groupthink. You come to bad decisions. So I don't make any decision in a silo. My entire team has a say in it. Whew, I feel like I talked for like an hour there.
You didn't. You said so many good things in there. I want to kind of break it down for just a second for our listeners. You said one sentence early on, which is, it's not the decision that my team makes, but it's how they make the decision that I care about.
Yes.
Which is, obviously the idea of debate. And you brought up the idea of coordinated debate. You brought the example of, the show in the 1950s and all these great egomaniac writers and comedians of the time, all sitting in one room and all kind of working towards not being the best, but putting out the best.
Yes.
Right. And
yep.
That's a collective rather than an individual.
Yes.
And not go ahead.
Not just the collective, but there's so many cognitive biases at play when you get a group in a room and the idea of groupthink. I brought it up earlier, JFK. If you ever get a chance, if you're listening to this, read about JFK's leadership style and how he changed it between the Bay of Pigs to the Cuban Missile Crisis. The Bay of Pigs was a foreign fiasco for us because decision making was flawed. You had all these people deciding, hey, let's go in and let's do this activity. Never got proper feedback, never vetted some of the responses, had no counterpoint, had no devil's advocate. He then changed the entire way he made the decision when it came to the Cuban Missile Crisis and instilled things as he made Bobby Kennedy, and I forgot the other dude's name, the other guy played devil's advocate. He removed everybody from the cabinet room. I don't know if you knew this, but he had everybody during the Bay of Pigs. Everybody was meeting in the cabinet room. The cabinet room is by rank. If you're the Secretary of Defense, you're really high. Secretary of State, right next to the president. Secretary of Agriculture, I think, was outside. It was all based on rank. He got rid of that. He said, in this work, so he made him go to the State Department to meet, and everyone was equal. He said, everyone has an equal say. Everyone is expected to input, no matter what level you're at, no matter who you are. You need to have input to this. And then he instilled these two guys as the devil's advocate to say, your only job, Bobby, is to go poke holes in their theory. Then he made these two teams take on not only their opinion of what they thought should be done, but then write a paper on it as president and then swap those papers with the other team to go see what the opposing team was saying and write back and say, this is what I think the problem with your decision was. So that, again, it was that he ingrained that conflict through the devil's advocacy. He put conflict into the rooms by making sure that everyone was equal and can speak their minds. And I do the same thing as CISO. As CISO, you shouldn't listen to me because I'm CISO. The lowest level employee, my analyst, tier 1 analyst, absolutely has a say in our decision-making process.
Yeah, I think if more people enacted that style of leadership, there's two things about that style of leadership that are very critical. One is time management, and the other thing is getting everyone to play by the same rules, right? Because oftentimes, leaders try this and fail at it. And they fail at it because they lack to create the definition of the collective. So what ends up happening is you have individuals trying to browbeat other individuals into a method of thinking. And we see that today even beyond just, the conference room style debate. It's happening on social media. We see it happening across anything. If someone disagrees with you, it's oftentimes they're not smart enough or they don't see everything, to where a lot of people who play the devil's advocate will be quiet. And I think the biggest challenge of COVID has been the idea of when you're in a boardroom, like you said, if I lock my team in a hotel room for 3 days and we're having debate and you're being observant as a leader, you can see someone's body language, the way they moved in their chair, like you just did, right? Getting comfortable or sitting back, or there's a level of reaction in body language that allows you to understand that that person has something to say. And they're not saying it either because they're afraid to say it because of the reaction it might garner, or they don't believe they can defend their point effectively.
And I witnessed that problem, and it's the way that you handle it as a leader, and it ultimately is the leader's job to mine for conflict. That's the term, that you need to go looking for that, and you need to get them in a safe place and say, hey, John, I noticed you hadn't said anything, and I actually noticed that you were squirming. Did you have something in your mind? 'Cause I feel like there's something you might want to share. Obviously, you don't just jump into a room at this. You've had to have that trust built up with the team and represent as a leader that they can trust you, and that you have their best intentions at heart, for me then to be able to say something like that to John and call him out in the meeting. You also say that ahead of time too. You say, hey, everybody, you guys know my practice. I actually make my teams at my offsites. We spend the first half day. We've studied JFK. We've studied the Mann Gulch, and another good story about leadership, the Mann Gulch Fire of 1949. I use these like case studies to go through as a team. The Google AdWords story about how Larry Page ran Google back in the early days, and everybody played hockey, and you were expected to be able to challenge and debate Larry, because everybody was equal. So we go walk through these cases together and then jump into the offsite and start. So it's also set as a primer that it's, hey, this is normal expected behavior of our team.
But that's so critical, and that's a step that a lot of people overlook. They kind of want to go with the theory, I want to get everyone in a room and I'm going to lay out a bunch of Red Bulls and cookies and donuts and bagels
pizza
and cream cheese and pizza, and now let's all debate, right? Let's all try to solve a problem. But there's no, I do a lot of debate, especially in geopolitics, because that's one of the things I often talk about at universities or to a bunch of different people because of my background. And I always say that when I'm invited to go to a debate where maybe I'm debating someone who disagrees with my point of view, my first question is, what are the guidelines to the debate? Because if someone's going to if you're going to start off with a slur, then we're not debating, we're just going to accuse.
Yep. Yeah. Set the ground rules. Yep.
Set the ground rules first. And that's so critical. Hearing you say that about saying, hey, we're going to go through this use case before you even go there. We're going to talk about setting the rules and what the rules are and how, the kind of conversation we expect people to have is very, very, very important. Because if you don't do that, you end up in a place where the team fractions almost into like an episode of Survivor, right? You've got different groups, and all these groups start kind of electing their own leaders, and then those leaders try to lead a conversation, and you end up in a two-party system, and I don't want a two-party system.
Yeah, I completely agree. The leaders want to jump ahead to, oh yeah, I get this. I don't need to worry about, reading about I don't need to make my team read 5 dysfunctions. Guess what? I make my team read 5 dysfunctions so they understand and you lay the groundwork. I don't need to build trust with my team for 3 months. I can just jump into an offsite and start debating. No, you need to build that trust as a leader. It needs to be a behavior pattern that you run and you ensure that they trust you. And you build that trust over time to get you to that level of, okay, and then you explain, here's what conflict and debate means, and here's why it's important. Let's go look at the Mount Everest and why, no conflict and debate led to the 1996, into thin air, which is another great story, another story about like information asymmetry. So you do all these practices, you take your bolt of knowledge and you don't just slam it on them. You give, maybe 6 months. I'm ballparking a roadmap of what it would take for me, what it took for me to get my team to fully trust each other, to be able to be at the level that we're at.
I love this conversation so much, but we're almost out of time, so I want to be respectful of that. I want to ask you one more question, then we're going to go into my favorite part of the podcast, which is our CISO Insight round. So looking ahead at the CISO role over the next few years, what skills do you see CISOs really needing to have in order to succeed in their role?
Presentation skills.
Yeah.
Both. And that goes both for written and graphic and in person, public speaking.
I completely agree. Presentation skills. I would also say communication skills. Beyond anything, pick your words in your presentation. I love. I was helping a peer of ours a few weeks ago with their presentation, and I was like, "Hey, it's great, but I just changed a bunch of stuff." And they go, "What'd you change?" I was like, "All your all cap stuff, or some of the fonts you were using, or the colors of the font you were selecting." And they go, "Why is that?" And I go, "Well, you want to make it professional and easy on the eyes, and yes, you want to raise awareness for specific parts of or things that you need within your security program, but you don't want to do it in dramatic fashion. You kind of want to do it with elegance and with style, and let your voice, let your tone, let your passion be what they agree with, and not all caps, red font, 36 size on a PowerPoint. Don't let that be what they see, right? Well-intentioned, very good, but learning that sometimes it's better to communicate vocally is much better, much better.
Yeah, you just brought up a great topic. Real quick, probably my biggest lesson learned as CISO is when to pick up the phone. I never picked up the phone enough times. I'd rely on email or written word and realize you lose context. There's so much more when you just talk on the phone. And as CISO, it's gone tenfold to where I just go, "Hey, can we just Zoom real quick?"
Yeah, do a Zoom or pick up the phone call.
Yeah.
Is critical. All right, folks, time for my favorite part of the podcast, the CISO Insight Round. Jason is going on the hot seat. Jason, I hope you're ready. 6 questions. You kind of have to answer them pretty quick. There's a clock ticking. I'm kidding. There's no clock ticking. This is purely for fun. All right. So let's start off with one buzzword you'd love to bury in my buzzword graveyard.
Automation.
Automation. Okay. Why?
Just because it can be automated doesn't mean it needs to be.
I like that. That is really good. What's one technology that'll change the way we do cybersecurity?
Okay, how do I explain? Virtual phone. So you will no longer have a device that you carry with you. You will interact with that virtual device through the environment.
That's a first. That's very interesting. Kind of changing the whole idea of devices.
Yeah, you won't have, in my opinion, you won't have a device. Everything, the Alexa, my computer screen, my car, somebody else's car will know who I am.
The environment of IoT.
Yes, will become a mesh network of sensor input where that's what I interact with, not a physical device I own.
Very interesting. The last book you read?
It was Simon Sinek's The Infinite Game.
Last
Great
movie
book.
you saw?
Mulan on Sunday.
Mulan. Very interesting. I will refrain from commenting on that film.
I'm sure a lot could be said about it.
There are extreme challenges with Mulan from a lot of different angles and so forth, but the story as itself as a book, it's a great story and it's a great book. The last film was a bit disappointing.
Yeah, I like the cartoon much better. I will agree with that.
Yeah.
As a quality movie, just the quality of the movie itself. Not making any judgment about
I'm kind
messages.
I know you're in California and you're in LA, but I love to write letters to Disney sometimes and say, will you please stop making animated movies in real life? I don't want to see
that's big rage now. Yeah.
Right? Like I don't know. Don't do Aladdin in human form. Keep it as a cartoon. Improve your CGI. Get some good voiceover, and just play it out.
Yeah.
Please. I don't want to see any actor in tights, and like, stuff trying to be a Disney character. It's a bit irritating. What's your favorite music?
Like genre?
Yeah.
Oh, that's an interesting question. Probably EDM, like Empire of the Sun.
Yeah. That's really, really interesting. I'm glad. I love it. You just right away went right to EDM. Most people go, well, it depends on my mood and whatnot. But you're just like, no, EDM, Empire of the Sun, man. It's pretty straightforward. I love it. For those watching, typically I give these questions ahead of time. But with Jason, I didn't want to. Kind of wanted to keep him on the hook. I kind of wanted to see if people, how he'd deal with it. So I'm glad I did. And
These are definitely real answers and spontaneous. I'm not
I know, it's great. People can tell by your voice. So what's one thing you took away from the COVID-19 crisis?
How much, I already knew this, the interaction with people in real life. The idea that, oh yeah, I can Zoom and we can have a virtual team was I gave it a lot more weight. Now I need those. And I know I even talked about it in a room, and the tactile nature of how you communicate and how you organize. And you mentioned it with the visualization of posture and how you're sitting and the body language. So much is lost in Zoom communication with my team and my team building that to be honest, I'm a little lost right now. I mean that nicely. I'll figure it out. We'll figure out how to hopefully vaccines come out. It'll be great in 2021, way better in 2020. But in the meantime, it's a struggle.
Yeah, it's I know that this week the UK started their vaccine. I know that the FDA has pretty much greenlit the Pfizer vaccine here in the States. So hopefully we'll, according to HHS Secretary Azar, no relation in our last names. Although we're both from Georgia, so it's really, really funny. He said that they're ready once the FDA green lights it. Within 72 hours, they're ready to start vaccinations.
That's fantastic.
So that means that it's supposed to get vaccinated on December 9th. It's supposed to get approved by the FDA December 9th, technically, which means by Friday or Saturday, we could start to see the first vaccines being given. And allegedly, the first person to get the vaccine on live TV is going to be President Trump, and then it's going to be followed by the three former presidents, Clinton, Bush, and Obama. And I think Jimmy Carter is also, I think all five of them are going to be kind of the first to take it kind of on TV.
Boy, give it to Carter first. That guy, was he almost 100 now and he's still building houses? He's amazing.
Yeah, Carter's in his 90s. It's really funny. I'll tell you something. As a resident of Georgia, every once in a while, if I'm driving to Augusta or I'm going over to Columbus or Fort Benning, I'll run into his Secret Service taking him somewhere.
Yeah.
And so I'll run into the two Suburbans that drive him around, the Secret Service. And so and I've been at a few events at his presidential library here in Atlanta where he was speaking, and it's very interesting. I wasn't very big on Carter's politics. I actually disagree with 95% of his politics, but I appreciate him as a person.
Yeah, his work with Habitat Humanity just shows how it's done. The guy's 98.
I mean, that's someone who took his the power of his role, and instead of enriching himself, he kind of really did focus on what else can he do, and hasn't been president for 40 years, and he still does a lot of work. And so that is one aspect that I can respect about President Carter, that I think irregardless of politics, you got to appreciate the person, and President Carter is an amazing human being.
Always help others, man. That's
he's unbelievable in that aspect. Perfect. Jason, thanks so much for coming on the podcast, man.
James, thanks for having me.
That's it. We're done, folks. Thanks so much to Jason. Thanks so much to our great sponsors and supporters of the podcast, who without them, this would not be possible. So make sure to check them out. They are in the links. There are links to their, products and everything is below on the website. So you guys can check them out. And if you need something, reach out to them and let them know that you heard of them through our show. So that way they know and continue to support us in the future. We're signing off for this week. We'll be back with more here as we wrap up 2020 and move into 2021. I've got some great 2021 news coming your way as well. I'll be doing that in a separate podcast. It'll be live. It'll be on LinkedIn and YouTube, so you'll want to tune in for that. Until then, Jason, thank you very much. Genki desu ka.
Thank you.
Desu ka, which is thank you in Japanese, folks. Learn a little bit of language. All right. That's it for us here. We'll be back with more until then. Till next week, folks. Stay healthy and stay cyber safe, and Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays to all.
Make sure to subscribe to our podcast and share it with your friends and colleagues. And get all the latest information at cyberhubpodcast.com.